Shalom, welcome to Rob on the Rock. I'm Rob Van Hoff, and I'm continuing my ancient manuscripts studies for the weekly Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Pinchas, or Phineas, as it's transliterated in English. The scripture we're looking at is from Numbers 26. And what we're looking at here is verses 33 and 34. So if you have a Bible, you can look at this. This is a section from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from Cave 4, that you see here. And it's dated to what we call the Herodian period. Which is right around the beginning of the first century into the first century, like between the years maybe 50 BC to 70 AD, basically, and right around the first century. And the passage refers to the daughters of Zelophehad. And in English, it says that Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, had no sons but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Mahlah, Noach, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And then it wraps up the counting of the numbers of the tribes of Manasseh. These are the families of Manasseh. Those that were numbered of them, 52,700. So that's Numbers 26, verses 33 to 34. And I've got the Hebrew here from the Masoretic text above. As we'll see, we'll read through this. And then we're going to contrast that with what you see from this fragment found from Qumran, which I'm going to say is what we call the Essene Hebrew version of the story, and it's a little bit different. And I'll use my nice neon green, if that's what that color is, marker to indicate some of the differences as we go here. So Numbers 26, 33 through 34 from the Torah portion called Pinchas. But we're looking here at the accounting of the new numbering of the tribes of Israel in the plains of Moab, opposite of Jericho. So this is right on the verge of entering the Promised Land, right at the north end of the Dead Sea. Presumably they could look down and see the whole Jordan River Valley entering into the Dead Sea. Ultimately, they would see also the site of Qumran itself. That would become Qumran, over 1,000 years later, of course. Well, here we go. So starting here at Numbers, so Lamed Gimel up here in the upper right is 33. Lamed Dalet is 34. Maybe what I'll do here is I'll use dark blue to mark. So we're reading Numbers 26, 33. That's Lamed Gimel and Lamed Dalet here, and it says Tzlofchad ben Hefer lo hayu lo banim ki im banot. So what we're reading is, and Tzlofchad ben Hefer lo hayu lo. So the first lo here, Lamed Aleph, is not. Hayu, were. There were not. Lo, Lamed Vav. There were not to him, which is the way of saying he did not have. Lo hayu lo. There was not to him. What was there not to him? Banim. Lo hayu lo banim. Sons were not his, I guess you could say, but literally it means he had no sons. But then it says, ki'im banot. Rather, daughters. So this is one of many times in Scripture where we see lo in a phrase contrasted with ki'im. So the lo is not this, and then ki'im. So not this, but this. So lo something, ki'im something means not this, but that. Not this, but that. So the sentence doesn't finish just with the idea that he had no sons, and that's the end of the story. It says, lo hayu lo banim, ki'im banot. But he did have, is implied, banot, daughters. And then we're going to continue here. It says, Vishem banot, and literally the name and name of daughters. And then, well, it's not banot, Vishem benot Tzlofchad. The name, the daughters of Tzlofchad. Notice here, just another little bit for Hebrew grammar learners. Banot here is what we call the absolute form. Notice it starts bet with the kamats, banot. But here we see bnot. Notice the bet, it's the same spelling, but it starts with a reduced vowel, just the shava. V'shem bnot. And that is what we call smichut, or the construct form. And so it means daughters of. So there's a little of in here implied. Daughters of Tzlofchad. The name of the daughters of Tzlofchad. And then it goes on and tells us the name. Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milka, Tirza. So these are the 5 daughters of Tzlofchad. And then verse 34, it says, wraps up, Ele mishpachot Menashe. Ele mishpachot Menashe. These are the mishpachot, the families of Menashe, u fkudehem, and their account, and their in their accountings, or and their accountings are, is implied, their total number, their total accounting is, and it says Shanayim v'chamishim elef u'sheva me'ot. Shanim v'chamishim, so means 2 and 50, and then elef means 1,000. So Shanayim v'chamishim is 2 and 50. Elef is 1,000. U'sheva me'ot, and 700. Me'ot is hundreds, 700s. So we're not going to get too much into the numbers there. That's not going to be the real parallel here. I'm going to go back to my neon green. What I want to point out is how this Cave 4 version of Numbers, now we don't know if it was originally an entire scroll of the book of Numbers. It might not have been. But in any case, we're going to look at the differences here. Well, our verse 33 starts right here, Lamed Gimel, right here. And we see Vav, Tzadi, so Vav, Tzadi, Lamed, another Vav, Pei, Chet, and then a partial Dalet. The Dalet is broken off here, but we can see the same name here again with the full Dalet, spelled the same way. Tzadi, Lamed, Vav, Pei, Chet, Dalet. Now, what we're going to notice here, now that we've identified that name, look at the spelling difference. So in the Masoretic text, it's spelled this way. Tzadi, go up here and we'll write it. Tzadi, Lamed, Pei, Chet, Dalet. It's kind of my little scribble here. But in the Qumran text, it has an additional letter. It has a Vav here. Tzadi, Lamed, Pei. Oops, I was going to Masoretic. Tzadi, Lamed, Vav, Pei, Chet, Dalet. Tzelofachad. And that's in both spellings here. So here's Tzelofachad, and here's our extra letter. Here's Tzelofachad, here's our extra letter. So we know it's the same person, it's the same man, but his name is spelled with an extra letter, and it sounds the same. Then we're going to look here. Ve'ele Shemot. See this? It says Ve'ele Shemot. Ve'ele Shemot. These are the names of. So if I were to go to our Masoretic text and modify it, well, let's say I modify it with my blue here. They have, I'm going to zoom way in here. Ve'ele, let me make that a little smaller. My nib is a little bit too big there. Ve'ele Shemot, rather than Vishem. And these are the names of the daughters. Ve'ele Shemot Benot Tzelofachad, rather than Vishem Benot. And that's what we see right here. Ve'ele Shemot. And if I did the opposite, if I bracket this out, the Masoretic text, instead of just Ve'ele Shemot, it just has Vishem. So I've kind of tried to make this so you could see both together. Vishem, and the name of. So that's a modification. And then if we continue down and we see where it says, obviously it's broken off. So it says, Ele Mishpachot Menashe. These are the families of Manasseh. And we see here Mishpachot also is spelled with a vav, Mishpachot, whereas in the Hebrew, all these instances of Mishpachot here in Numbers are spelled without the vav, but here you see it. See how there's no vav in this Mishpachot here? So again, what they're doing in this K4 copy, they're going to spell the same word, mem, shin, pei, chet, vav, tav, mishpachot. So they add a letter. And finally, we're going to see this word where it says uf kudeham, and their accounting and their numbering. Notice here, it's pei, kuf, dalet, yod, hey, mem. Notice what it is here. Sorry for all the scribbling around. I hope this is something you can follow. First of all, they have a lamed here instead of a vav, and they have a vav or a yod here. We don't really know if this could be a yod or a vav. I'm saying it's probably a yod. It looks exactly like this one here. But it makes no difference. The point is they're adding a letter, and it would mean the same whether it was a vav or a yod, essentially. So to go back to the Masoretic text that we see here, the Qumran scroll has lamed, pei, kuf, yod, dalet, yod, hey, mem. So, difference even in a letter, not just adding a letters in instances, but actually changing a letter. So let me go back through here. Let me erase all these, and I'm going to go through and mark them out one at a time, because I know I kind of did that really quickly. I'm going to use our bright green here. So we have Numbers 26, 33 starting here. And Zelophehad, and we see they spell it with an extra vav here that's not present. And we're just assuming that with this blotch you see here that the dalet was broken off. So this is a full dalet. We're not thinking that's a different letter. And then ve'ele shemot is completely different, whereas the text above, and then the Masoretic, has Veshem simply. Whereas this whole thing is added. Benot Zelofahad, we have an added Vav. Ve'ele Mishpachot, we have an added Vav. Menashe is fine. Le instead of U. And then this Yod or Vav, which is not in the Masoretic text. So, and this is verse 34, starts back here. So what would you say? If someone said, well, all we have are these two versions, which one's the original numbers? Well, first of all, we can see that this text, it's written with a relatively uniform script, but we do not have the whole manuscript. It's highly damaged. We don't know if this was a collection of passages of Scripture or was this a complete scroll of the book of Numbers. We just don't know. Whereas the Masoretic scribes preserved the entirety of the Tanakh, and they had rigorous quality control to make sure that they produced it over and over again. Even though there are sometimes that scribes make errors, usually other scribes come and fix them on the same manuscript. But here we don't see anything like that. We just see, now, is there a big meaning shift? No. Is the difference between, Shem Benot Zelofahad different than Ve'ele Shemot? Probably not that big of a difference. However, we see that there is a little bit of freedom in the scribal tradition of the Essene Hebrew. They did not take each letter as being important. They did not take the spelling of words as something that should be preserved without modification. They didn't see it as fixed, divinely revealed text. Whereas the Masoretic scribes, the scribes above, now of course this is from a printed edition, but they took great pains to not modify the text. They believed that they didn't have the authority to change the text because they just were to copy it as received, because it was coming from a greater authority than themselves. So the best scribes in the Masoretic tradition are to preserve what they receive without modification. Not so with the Essene scribes. The Essene Hebrew scribes felt free to modify, to change, to elaborate, to modify spellings, like we see with the name Zelofahad, with the word Mishpachot, and then to express things slightly differently, like with the Lamed instead of the Vav, and then changing a phrase, instead of Shem Benot Zelofahad, Ve'ele Shemot Benot Zelofahad, and to add, adding additional words. So this is an example of how the scribal worlds in the first century, this is in Jesus' day, were different depending on who you look to as the scribal authorities. If you went to the temple scribes, you would see a text that was the very conservative text, the text that comes down to us in the Masoretic tradition. Of course, not without not with vowel points at that time. The vowel points were added later. But if you went out to Qumran, or if you were in a community where there were Essene scribes, you would get some of the same material that was in the Torah preserved by the Jerusalem temple scribes, but with some fluidity and a little, like, hold on loosely a little bit, where there could be some changes, because the authority for the Essene scribes is in the belief that they have a prophetic inspiration themselves, and that the writing of Scripture is only secondary to their authority of their community. And so this functioned polemically as a kind of opposing stance, if you will, a political opposition to the temple and a political opposition to the scribes of the temple, to say, look, you think that you're holy, you think that you preserve the Scripture. Well, actually, we are the true people of God, and therefore we feel free to modify the Scriptures and to have different Scriptures than you do. Okay, so here's an example that we looked at today from Numbers 26, 33 through 34, continuing what I was doing in 2020 for the ancient Torah manuscripts. I hope this is a fun, entertaining, but also educational for you. Be sure to support my channel. There's some link here for PayPal if you would like to support my work here at Rob on the Rock. Shalom.